Hi, so good to be here. Welcome to all the familiar faces and to new ones as well. Thank you, Mara. It's great to be back. I'm just gonna change my view so I can see all of you instead of myself. Huge. Um, Fantastic. What a time to be alive. Glad to be connected to people far and near through Torah learning, seeing all these places coming in on the chat. It's really one of the joys of this world to be able to learn Torah with people in differently shaped communities. So this week we read Parashat Chayei Sarah. Um, It's a somewhat strangely named parsha. There are some traditions that give a lot of significance to the names of parshiot. Other people are like, it's just the first words of where they broke it up. It's not that big a deal. But there is a kind of irony of it that we refer to this as the life of Sarah, our matriarch, and it's about her death. The beginning of really most of the parsha is about her death and the picking up the pieces from that. Um, the introduction of these are the years of the life of Sarah, and they number her years, and then it says that she died. So even um, the description of her life is about her death. This is a parsha with a lot of death. It opens with Sarah's death, closes with Abraham's death, and everything in between feels like a sort of preparation for that, how to create continuity. Abraham's last task is to find a mate for Yitzchak, his son. It feels like when he does that, that he feels like he's on the brink of death. This is his last action. Turns out later he remarries Keturah and has like 8 more kids and lives for a long time after that. But that can be what it feels like, literally. Um, so I want to jump in. I'm interested. I think the question we're really going to explore this week is what's the order and proximity of events, and where are all of our main characters at different times? Um, so let's jump into it and share some of the challenges. I'm going to put the a link to the source sheet in the chat. So if you want, and I'll also do a lot of screen sharing if you want to, but if you want to like blow it up in a different size, you can feel free to do that. Um, okay, share screen. Here we go. All right. We have to start this week's Parsha with the end of last week's Parsha. Um, so the major event at the end of last week's Parsha, Vayera, is of course the binding of Isaac. And Sarah is not present. We have no indication that she knows that this is happening. God speaks to Avram. Avram takes his son, takes him up to the mountain, ties him to the mountain, lights the fire. God calls out, wait, and the angel comes in and interrupts it. And then the Parsha ends with Avram getting news of births of lots of relatives back in the old country. And then we have this week's Parsha beginning with Sarah's death. Um, so that leads to a kind of literary association that maybe it was somehow finding out what happened at the Akedah that led to Sarah's death. And there are many midrashim that go in that direction. The chronological problem is that if that's the case, then that means Yitzchak was 37 at the time of the Akedah, because age-wise, we know how old his parents were when he was born. Sarah's 127 when she dies, and she was 90 when he was born. So that would mean that he was 37. He certainly doesn't seem 37. He seems more like a young child. The last episode before that, he would have been about 3. So we don't get a lot of evidence of what happened in the middle in Yitzchak's life. So there are traditions that he was a young child. There are traditions that he was 37, but it's hard to say. Be that as it may, let's try to do a mapping of our characters. So at the end of last week's Parsha, we find out Avram returned to his youths, his Ne'arav, his assistants, his staff, his servants, young servants, and they went together toward Beersheba, and Avram settled in Beersheba. And then it immediately just goes into the news of births of lots of relatives in the old country leading up to Rivka. So foreshadowing. And that's it. That's the end of the parsha. So I want to already pause right there and ask a question. From that story, again, Abraham goes up the mountain with Yitzchak and has his youths with him too. Goes up, has a whole conversation with Abraham. Father, here are the trees, here's the wood, here's the wood, here's the kindling, but where's the sheep? Abraham says, oh, God will show you the sheep. He binds him, he ties him down, about to do the deed. The angel calls in and he sacrifices the ram instead. And then Avram returned to his youths, and they went together toward Beersheba, and Avram settled in Beersheba. So let's already notice what's present and what's absent in that verse. Does anybody have any noticings or questions that come up about key characters just from that closure of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac? You feel free to raise your virtual hand and we'll be able to unmute you.
We'll go to Eileen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you able to unmute, Eileen? Okay. We hope you're there. We hope you're okay. We're gonna go to Susie.
Thank you. Where is Sarah?
Great question. So, yeah, where is Sarah this whole time? Is she live? I mean, it sort of feels like Avram settles in Beersheba. Like, is that where she is? We never got like a location at the beginning where the family is settled. The family has moved around some, but where is she when Avram goes back and settles in Beersheba? Does she ever find out about this? How does she find out? Good question. Eileen, are you ready to unmute? If not, we'll go to Jay.
Okay, we'll go to Jay.
I don't think Yitzhak is mentioned as coming down with Abraham.
Yeah, where the heck is Yitzchak?
Yeah.
That's a very key question. It's actually, if I'd fed my Yetzer Hara to always put more and more and more text, my evil inclination to put more and more text on a page, I would have given like the whole Binding of Isaac story. And you see this phrase, Vayashev Abraham el Na'arav, Abraham returned to his youths, is actually like a literary call up to on the way up the mountain. That same language is used around Avraham, Vayelchu Yachdav, twice. That Avraham and Yitzchak, Vayelchu Shnehem Yachdav. There's an opening of their dialogue and the closing of their dialogue. So the third time that phrase is said, Shnehem, the two of them is missing, and it's Vayelchu Yachdav, they walk together, but he's with somebody else now. Like almost as though it's like he forgot Yitzchak up there. Like he tied Yitzchak to the mountain. And he doesn't kill him in the end. He kills the ram, but it's almost like, did he forget to untie Yitzchak? Is Yitzchak still there? Where does Yitzchak go? We know he's alive. He didn't kill him. And later on, we're gonna see him have a full life and have children and everything. But where is Yitzchak? Okay, very, very important question. And I think the end of the story is literarily really highlighting to us with intentional language that we wants us to notice that Yitzchak is not with Avraham. In fact, Yitzchak and Avraham are never going to speak to each other again. We're never going to see them together alive in the rest of the Torah. We're also never going to see Avram and Sarah together again after the Akedah. So a lot of questions. So let's try to unpack what we can put together. So again, there's a little interlude of Acharei hadvarim ha'ele yugad la'Avraham. After all this happened, Avraham got news like a telegram from the old country. By the way, so and so had a baby, and they had a baby, and like a bunch of kids were born. It sort of makes sense that you would actually find out many years worth of news all at once. It's a far distance, and like to get a messenger send, you would find out it all at once. Whether that happened after the Akedah or at some other point, I don't know, but literally it's there seemingly as foreshadowing for the birth of Rivka, because the next major event in our parsha will be Abraham looking for a wife for Yitzchak back in the old country, which will be Yitzchak. So that's the only interlude. And then we get into the beginning of our parsha with this like very strange lilting opening. Vayu Chaye Sarah, the name of our parsha. Me'ah shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim shanei Chaye Sarah. So I translated it. Some translations try to smooth it out and make it sound like normal English. I followed the weird Hebrew syntax so that we would feel the lilting, unusual sense in the English as well. And Sarah's life came to 100 years and 20 years and 7 years, the years of Sarah's life. And Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Vayavo Abraham lispod l'Sarah v'livkota. So, still don't know anything about Yitzchak. But our first question that Susie asked about where is Sarah? Well, we don't know anything about chronology. We have only guesses about when the Akedah was, and the guesses span 34 years of time. But from a literary perspective, it's chilling that after the Akedah, Avraham goes and settles in Beersheba. The next thing we see is that Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, Hebron, and Avram had to come to mourn for her. So it seems like, I mean, again, the Akedah might have happened 34 years, as many as 34 years earlier, and there might have been a lot of other life that happened in the meantime. But literally, in terms of the cues the Torah gives us, it seems like Avraham comes down from the Akedah and goes and settles in a different city. Not that far, but not that close. I mean, Beersheba and Hebron, today it's probably, I don't know, 40 minutes in a car or something. So I don't know, probably like a day's journey. Not like that far, but not close. Living in a totally different place. And never, literally speaking, never talks to Sarah again, never sees Sarah, never has to face her. It arouses the imagination. There are many, many, many midrashim that imagine Sarah's grief, Sarah dying from finding out about the Akedah, or the Satan in some midrashim telling her that it actually happened, or implying to her that Yitzchak was actually killed and she can't bear it. Again, I don't want to say this with too much certainty. The biblical text is somewhat ambiguous, and there are other midrashim that place the Akedah decades earlier, when Yitzchak was a small child. Maybe there's lots of life together, but literally speaking, the Torah sets it up that almost as though to say like Avram couldn't bear to face Sarah after this. So we see a divine relationship that has been strengthened and a family relationship potentially in wreckage. I don't want to overstate it. Like Abraham puts a lot of emphasis on giving Sarah a proper burial. He immediately comes to weep and mourn for her after she's dead. He's not callous, but their relationship as living, loving people seems to be gone. Comments, observations. I'll stop the share for a moment. Comments, observations, questions. I'll skim the chat too. Let's see. We saw Let's see. Abraham, Richard says Abraham and Yitzchak never talk to each other again in the Torah. That's correct. Abraham only talks to like his servants after this, and then to the elders of Hebron, Ephron and his family to negotiate for a burial plot. There's the Midrash, says Paula, that says Isaac goes to Ishmael and Hagar. We're going to get to that. Who are the youths that Abraham is returning to? Says Deborah. Presumably, he's a rich man. He's got staff. So he's got to carry a lot of stuff up to the sacrifice, and he brings some youthful. He's an old man, also. So just how old, we don't know. I guess he's young enough that he still sires 8 more children after this. But he's an old man and he's a rich man, so he has staff. Yeah, I commonly translated as servants. Thank you, Rob. But the Hebrew says Ne'arim. I follow the school of translation that is most associated with like Franz Rosenzweig and Martin Buber, of not trying to clarify or smooth things out in the Hebrew by rendering it in like idiomatic English, but rather holding on to um, if a word is used multiple times, using the same word so that we see the echoes within the biblical text. And if that makes for a more ambiguous English text, maybe that mirrors the ambiguity in the Hebrew. So I translated as youths, but yeah, presumably from context, it's not false to say that they're servants. Wasn't the Akedah conversation between Abraham and Yitzchak the only one shared in the Torah? Yes, I think that's right. Da, 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 da. Rachel had a question. I see your hand is up. Rachel Stern, unmute and hit it.
Hi. Yeah, so I was told when I was little, I learned that the reason that Sarah passed away wasn't because about the Akedah.
Oh.
Rather, I was told that it's because the Satan came to her and said, haha, actually, Yitzchak isn't dead. So I'm not sure
Yeah, I mean,
which
it
one
could
it is.
be.
Yeah.
Right. The problem is so what the Torah gives us is the story of the Akedah. It ends. Avram comes down by himself with his staff, without Yitzchak, to Beersheba. Next thing we know, Sarah dies in Hebron. That's all we know. And so every everything we are as a group doing to like fill in the literary gaps, that and more is what Chazal or sages throughout the ages have done in like very close reading, imaginative reading. So the midrashim that imagine the Satan speaking to Sarah, I think are getting into what did Sarah never know about the Akedah? She wasn't told at the beginning. She's not mentioned, but our imagination starts to run wild, and we're not alone in this. The rabbis of the Midrash and the Talmud, like their imaginations have to run wild. The Torah invites our imaginations to run wild. Did she die in response to this? And was it where would her mind be going if she finds out that Abraham, like maybe she's looking for those Ne'arim, the staff, to do some task, and someone's like, oh, they went with Abraham and Yitzchak up to some mountain, and her mind starts to wonder, wait, what's happening? And that voice could be literally, or it could be kind of like psychologically, figuratively, um, you know, personified as the Satan, the dark voice that tells you the worst things that could have happened. So all of those midrashim are plausible psychological, emotional, midrashic responses to a basic problem. This traumatic event happens, and we see no human response. The next thing we know, she dies. So our mind wanders. Again, that might be 34 years later, but literally it's right next to it. So anything any of you have read about, I heard the Satan said this, or she responded that way. Those are all, there's so much midrash about this that is all plausible. And that is all the rabbis trying to do this work of figuring out, oh my gosh, what must this have been like for her? How do we make sense of her life? It's the most sacred, most rigorous form of fan fiction, as a word, of like trying to fill in how can we make sense of these connections here that the Torah is inviting us to connect. And many of the midrashim are mutually exclusive. They can't all coexist, but they're all reasonable ways of filling in the story. I recommend there's a book that the Jewish Publication Society published, I want to say like in the 80s or 90s, called I believe it's called The Akedah by Professor Shalom Spiegel. The Akedah. It's an English translation, beautiful English translation of a long article he had written in Hebrew in like the 60s, I want to say. He was a medieval Hebrew literature scholar at the Jewish Theological Seminary, a Midrash scholar as well, and he wrote a beautiful book weaving together all the Midrashic traditions about the Akedah. Um, and, and it's a very readable and heartbreaking and touching work. We don't know that Sarah knew about the Akedah. Our imaginations have to run wild. Thanks for asking that, Martin. I'll say that just to be clear again. Here's what we know from the biblical text. We know about the Akedah. God speaks to Abraham and tells him to bring Yitzchak. He brings two assistants with him. Abraham and the assistants come down and settle in Beersheba. Sarah dies in Hebron at age 127. That's what we know. Sarah might have gone to her death never having known this happened. It's possible. All right, we've got Arnold has been waiting for a while, and then Bruce, and then Deborah, and then we'll move on to
And I also, I'm worried about Joel's arm. He's had his physical arm up for a long time.
Oh,
So
then go
we'll add-
Joel first. Let's go Joel first.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Joel, you're up.
Okay. To me, you hear me? To me, this is God is testing Abraham's faith. It's a story that Abraham is being tested. But Sarah never gets tested. This is a family. And they all believe in God in the family, but Sarah never gets tested. Abraham gets tested.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, Arnold, take it away.
To me, it's not surprising that Abraham moved away after this. I mean, he's throughout his life, I feel like he's been treating Sarah like she's not really part of his life. He tried to pimp her twice. He, when she gives him a woman, he's grateful, but he doesn't want to get involved in all the problems that is. So he's involved with God, and that's about it. And she's the one who has to deal with all the issues.
Thanks, Arnold. Yeah, and I think that's part of what the rabbis of these many midrashim might be picking up on, that against that backdrop, it's hard not to read family conflict into the absence of Sarah. Like, what is the Torah doing when it sets up a few key stories from their life in which Avram, maybe under financial duress, I mean, people in refugee situations are put in positions of doing very, very hard things. But Sarah is certainly put in a very compromising and dangerous situation by Abraham. Abraham gets wealthy off of it, maybe out of duress and danger and fear for life, but it's certainly not a good situation. And we see that Sarah is mad at Abraham earlier when she's infertile, and he seems not to be that sympathetic, and is like, even when he's promised the son Yitzchak, he's like, but I've got Yishmael, that's enough for me. I don't like, maybe I think the midrashic imagination is like, whoa, what's going on in their relationship? And then this major thing happens to her son, who was born miraculously after she was postmenopausal, and she has the son, and he on his divine voice goes and comes within centimeters of killing her son. She doesn't seem to know about, like, so did she know? Like, I think the Midrashim have to ask these questions, and what happens to the relationship as a result. Let's say Bruce and Deborah and Kathy, and then I'm gonna move on to some other texts. And she just to answer Sheila, just as a clarification question. No, we never see anything in the biblical text of her finding out. Once again, all we have, what I brought for you, the Akedah ends, Abraham and his assistants settle in Beersheba. Sarah dies at the age of 127 in Kiryat Arba, Hebron. So put the pieces together. There are pieces missing. How you connect them? It's possible to connect them that Sarah was living in Beersheba at the time too. Avram came back Beersheba. She knew about it. It's possible to fill it out that like she never heard about it. Never knew. Avram came back from a day of sacrifice. Oh, where's Yitzchak? Maybe Yitzchak was right there. It just doesn't mention it. Maybe Yitzchak has gone elsewhere. Well, I don't know. Does he lie? We don't know. There are many, many ways you can fill those gaps. The Torah doesn't say. So that's what the Midrashim are doing, I think, wisely and profoundly, but also, intelligent guesswork. Bruce, Deborah, Kathy, and then we're gonna move on.
So I am also bothered by a number of things that are left out of the story. First of all, in last week's Parsha, we read that Abraham took his only son, Isaac. Well, we know that that's not the case. Or Isaac was not his only son, and we know that. Yet the Torah says he took his only son. Secondly, I want to pick up on what Uriel mentioned a few minutes ago in the conversation here. There doesn't seem to be any indication at all that Isaac tried to do anything to keep himself from being sacrificed. I mean, he wasn't like an infant. He had some cognition. He had some sensibilities. Where was he? Where was he in his own defense? There was no, yeah, he could have believed in Hashem, but to that extent, it's hard to believe that something like that didn't take place. But there is no indication, and it's always bothered me.
Yeah, and I think you're in great company, and I think that bothering is a source of real curiosity. What's that all about? And again, he might be anywhere between age 3 and 37.
Yeah.
If you want to read Sarah's death as a response to the Akedah, then he's 37 at the time. And then you really get some powerful questions about what's going on. When he dialogues with Abraham, he doesn't sound 37. Sounds more like, 8, 9. Or is he an adult with arrested cognitive development? Like there's a lot of questions about it. But if he's 3, which is possible, the last time we saw him, he was about 3. So maybe that happened right after that. If he's 3 or 4, then maybe it's easier to understand why he doesn't. I don't know, but those are very powerful questions no matter what. What's Isaac about? What's Sarah about in these stories? Deborah, go ahead.
Thanks. I feel like this is kind of a sacrilegious question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and you can not answer it if you think it is. I'm bothered by all the things that have been mentioned, and I feel like we teach little kids like the purpose of this story is like absolute, complete, utter obedience to God, and yet there are other places where we see Abraham perfectly capable of pushing back and having a negotiation with God, like even for people that he doesn't know. And I feel like Abraham is maybe not able to do that because it is such a huge and close personal hurt. But every time I read this, it's kind of like when you watch West Side Story and you like want the guys in the candy store to be nice to Anita. Like I always want Abraham to say to God, absolutely not. You are a just God, and a just God would never ask that of me. And I can't be the first person to wish or think that. And I wonder if
Certainly not. There's a
Midrash
ton
about,
of
but yeah.
ton of especially contemporary literature asking that. And a lot of people, I think Rabbi David Hartman writes this way, and a lot of other writers, that the literary point of the story is actually Avraham failed this test and he passed the test with arguing for Sodom and Amorah. It's worth noting that nobody until like the 19th or 20th century, nobody read it that way. That it was a failed test, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just it we have to place what is it about contemporary sensibilities that has amplified that question. What was it that enabled previous generations to see this as a powerful act of faith that contemporary readers find horror in that? That's interesting to me. I would say, like, instinctively, I share a lot of the kind of literary sensibility you're sharing. But I don't know. I'm not, and I think those are very, very live questions.
Yeah.
I do, with permission, I see there are a few hands. I know Kathy, you've been waiting for a long time, and Harry and Susie, I see you too. I do want to make sure we give some attention to Yitzchak. So I want to, with your permission, look back at the text, and then hopefully we'll have time for some more discussion. And so maybe keep your hands raised so we remember we can bring them in too. I want to make sure we have time though for what's really kind of the point. I shouldn't say the point. Everything we do is the point. So where has Yitzchak been this whole time? As we mentioned, we see a lot of attention to Yitzchak going a conversation with Avram going up the mountain. This two-verse dialogue between them that is sandwiched literarily by the repeated phrase "Vayilchu shnehem yachdav," the two of them walk together. And then the third time that phrase is uttered, it's "Vayilchu yachdav" with Abraham and the Ne'arim, the youths, which seems to draw attention to Yitzchak's absence. It's possible to read it as he's just not the focus, but he's there too. But literarily, it seems to be emphasizing his absence. I don't know if I would want to go down the mountain with my dad either after something like that. But where does he go? And in the next major narrative is Abraham negotiating for a burial plot for Sarah. Yitzchak is not part of that at all. And then after that, the long story in chapter 24 of the latter part of chapter 24 of Abraham asking his unnamed servant, who's named Eliezer in other places, his main servant, to go back to the old country and find a wife for Yitzchak. It seems like Abraham is now trying to wrap up his life. And the servant's like, okay, but what, maybe I should bring Yitzchak with me? Like, what if I meet somebody and she's like, all right, I'm theoretically interested, but I'd like to meet the guy first. Legit question, Eliezer. And Abraham's like, no, on no account must you take my son back there. Adonai, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from my native land, who promised me on oath, saying, I will assign this land to your offspring, will send a messenger before you, and you'll get a wife for my son from there. And if the woman does not consent to follow you, you shall then be clear of this oath to me. But do not take my son back there. Rak et beni lo tashev shama. It's like, okay, chill, dude. Like, what? Why is Abraham so insistent that Yitzchak not be taken back to the old country? He can't leave the land. I mean, Abraham left the land for when there was famine, so what's he so urgent about? So all we know is that Yitzchak wasn't there. Where he is this whole time, it almost makes it sound like Yitzchak is still here, but he never says Yitzchak is here. He just says, don't take him there. The next time we see Yitzchak, this is the next time we see Yitzchak after the Akedah. The end of this whole long story of Avram's servant going through the long rigmarole of Avram, and then going a whole rigmarole of testing and meeting Rivka at the well and like saying the offer, and then meeting the family and telling the whole thing again, and then bringing her back. This multiple repeated, it's the most verbose episode in the Torah. And Rivka agrees to come right now. And And as they approach, the Torah tells us, Yitzchak, meanwhile, had come back from the coming to Be'er Lachairoi, and he was settled in the land of the Negev. And Yitzchak went out, I said wandering, but who knows what lasuach means? Conversing, chattering, walking, meditating. Let's keep it as wandering. We can get back to it. Yitzchak went out doing something in the field before dusk, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and look, camels were coming. In the next verse, Rivka lifted her eyes and saw the man Yitzchak, and she fell off her camel. So there's a lot to wonder about. Why does he just see camels coming and doesn't get what the context is? Why does Rivka immediately understand? Why does she fall off her camel? It doesn't say Vatered me'agamal, it's Vatipol me'agamal. She fell off. What does lasuach mean? What is Yitzchak doing in the field? It seems to be a cognate of the word siach, which means speech or conversation. But who is he talking to? If he's out talking and the field, talking isn't an activity associated with the field. A lot of translations render it as walking, but that's just from the rest of the sentence. But there's actually no like linguistic evidence that the word lasuach ever means walking. So he's out doing something in a field. Where is he coming from? He's now back in, it says the land of the Negev. That could be Beersheba, where Abraham was last settled. And that is part of the Negev, but it might be separate. But he's just come back from Be'er Lachai Ro'i. So in other words, this is the first time we're seeing him since the Akedah. So the only place we know he's been since the Akedah is Be'er Lachai Ro'i. Does anybody remember where we've seen Be'er Lachai Ro'i before? What that place is? Mike Fury says Hagar. Right. So the only time we've seen Be'er Lachai Ro'i in the past was the first time that Avram kicked out Hagar when she came back. And then later, when Ishmael was a kid and Yitzchak was a kid, he kicked her out again permanently. But back in chapter 16, Sarai, her name is still Sarai at this point, has been infertile, unable to conceive, and she suggests to Avram that he have relations with her Egyptian servant Hagar, and then be like, and I will be built up through her seed. It's a kind of erasure of the humanity of Hagar, and maybe a naive speculation that my disappointment will be alleviated through this other kid. And then it doesn't happen. Sarai gets mad. She perceives, whether reaction to something really happened or if it's internal, either one is legitimate experience. Sarai perceives that she's been kind of like demoted in Hagar's estimation. Hagar is not treating her with deference anymore and says to Avram, do something to her. So Avram to Sarai is like, your maid is in your hands. Deal with her as you think right. Sarai abused her. Sarai. She ran away from her. So at that point, so Hagar runs out, and a messenger of Adonai finds her by a spring of water in the wilderness and says, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where you come from? Where are you going? She's like, run away from Mr. Sarai. And then the messenger says three things with no responses, which you sort of implies that like Hagar must be like, not understanding or not being on board with what the messenger says. The messenger of Adonai says, go back to your missus and submit to her abuse. What? Messenger says further, I'm going to increase your offspring. There are going to be too many to count. She's like, what are you talking about? The messenger of Adonai says to her further, look, you're pregnant and you're going to bear a son. You're going to call him Ishmael because God has paid heed to your abuse. And it's going to be like this wild person, everyone's hand against him. He's going to dwell alongside all of his kin. He's going to have this whole future. And after finding out that she's going to have a son, that she's pregnant, she didn't know, she called Adonai who spoke to her, you are El Roi. You are the God who sees me. by which she meant, have I not gone on seeing after my being seen? Being seen by God enables me to have vision, enables me to see a future, enables me to see something beyond this horrible abuse that I'm experiencing. Being seen enables resiliency. And therefore, the well was called Be'er Lachai Ro'i, between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore a son to Avram. Avram gave the son that Hagar bore the name Ishmael. And so that's our only association with it, that Be'er Lachai Ro'i is the place founded by Hagar upon being seen by God. And we actually don't know where Hagar and Ishmael go when they're kicked out the second time, when they're with just a water bottle and she almost, starves to death and can't bear to watch Ishmael dying of dehydration, and then God shows them a well. And so the rabbis kind of put together that was probably by Be'er Lachai Ro'i too. That seems to be where Hagar and Ishmael made a home when they were exiled. And the Midrash on our verse saying Yitzchak had come from Be'er Lachai Ro'i says, so what's all this coming? He came from coming, Ba mi bo. He came from death, from almost being killed at the Akedah. And where did he go? To Be'er Lachai Ro'i. He went to bring Hagar, the one who had sat at the well and said to the one who lives forever, see my suffering. And this isn't just a temporary thing. I want to really emphasize what this means, that Yitzchak had presumably been the cause of Yishmael and Hagar's exile. Sarah sees Yishmael mitzachek at Yitzchak, which could mean mocking him. It could mean abusing him, like the word is used in sexual connotations elsewhere. So we have everything in the range for from making fun of him to abusing him sexually as midrashic possibilities of what Yishmael was doing to Yitzchak. And Sarah imposes they have to be kicked out as a result of that. Abraham totally complies. So they kick them out with just a water bottle. And we never get any indication that Yitzchak had, went to go reconcile or find out what happened. But after the Akedah, when he gets abused, his experience of victimization and pain and trauma doesn't lead him into competitive suffering as saying, I'm the one who's really experienced parental trauma. It leads him to connect to Ishmael and Hagar. Oh, wow. Now that I'm here on this mountain, not coming back with my father, there might be things that I haven't seen before. I had been so into my experience of Ishmael didn't treat me kindly, or maybe Ishmael even treated me harshly or abused me, that I haven't been able to see what Ishmael was experiencing, what Hagar was experiencing. And that doesn't mean that what he did to me didn't exist, but there's a context, there's a cycle of violence and trauma, and Yitzchak sees his place and his people with Ishmael and Hagar. That's where he had gone after the Akedah, according to the only place we know he had been after the Akedah is he went down from the Akedah by himself to Be'er Lachai Ro'i and tried to do some reconciliation. And we know that this wasn't just a temporary thing, and I'll wrap up with this. But at the end of our parsha, when Avram had breathed his last, dying at a happy, ripe age, old and full of years, he was gathered to his kin. His sons Yitzchak and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, the same plot that Avram had bought for Sarah's grave. And it happened after the death of Avraham that God blessed Yitzchak his son, and Yitzchak settled near Be'er Lachai Ro'i. That's his long-term home. Even after the death, Yitzchak casts his lot with Ishmael and Sarai and Hagar. And I think there's a powerful message with which we'll close, with apologies to Kathy and Harry. There's a powerful message with which we close this parasha that I think is an emotional and moral challenge to us, when we experience trauma and fear and hurt, it is equally logical for that trauma and hurt to point us toward others who have experienced trauma and hurt, even if they've experienced that for our protection, on our account, if they've been hurt in order to protect us. That is the story of Yitzchak and Yishmael. Like, I think the usual contemporary story is that if I've experienced trauma and hurt, I don't have room for anybody else's story. I'm fully immersed in my own, and we engage in competitive suffering. And our parsha sends a powerful message that when our central avot, Yitzchak, does the opposite. When he experiences hurt and trauma, he goes straight to another person who hurt him, who has experienced hurt and trauma, and to work things through together. That is where he casts his lot. And may we learn to cast our lot for our pain to point us toward empathy as well. Shabbat Shalom.